enough to hold on to the tremendous grief and loss the pandemic has brought on for others and for us, and at the same time take note of the lessons it teaches us, the growth we have experienced. One cannot do the spiritual work of Rosh Hashanah without seeing how the road we have traveled, each of us, has changed us. It's given us opportunities for growth and reconnected us to our purpose, to Torah. On Friday night, I shared some of those lessons. On a Rosh Hashanah that coincides with Shabbat, I noted how the pandemic has brought with it a great Shabbat imposed on us all, forcing us to slow down, often to Shabbat. Stop. Full stop. The Torah commands that without doing that each week, and then each 7 years, and then a massive 50-year reset of the entire society's system of privilege, and without the lessons each of those brings, we will forget who we truly are and have no idea where we are supposed to be going. We will be lost in the noise. We will be living out the values of the surrounding culture, not our own as Jews, as so much of the ending chapters of Deuteronomy warns. The pandemic has forced a sabbatical year upon us and the spiritual journey that a sabbatical year brings with it, because we were not taking it upon ourselves earlier, and it has forced us to reconnect with our roots thereby, which is its purpose. The holiday of Rosh Hashanah has the same purpose. So what has it reconnected us to? What home does a sabbatical year invite us to enter? Our home as Hebrews is the shepherd home. While other civilizations were urbanizing and building the towers of Babel upward and the great cities of Egypt, concentrating wealth and turning the masses into serfs, focusing on the might of kings, our Hebrew ancestors were the simple, humble shepherds. My ancestor was a wandering Aramean, begins each Israelite's declaration in the temple, and also in the Pesach Seder. We were the nomads, the temporary residents. We lived in tents, not in towers. Abraham's wealth, his kavod, his heaviness, lay not in his possessions, because that's just more stuff to carry around. Possessions are a burden, but actually in how many people he could employ, how many people he could share his table with. The pandemic has given us the opportunity to reconnect with our roots as the simple shepherd, before all the noise and the copying of the materialistic values of the countries we found ourselves in, just as the Torah warned us would happen. I'll tell you, one of the experiences I had during the pandemic was I was just waiting, and again, I know that these are my experiences, and I hope they don't sound trite to you, and I know they're very bourgeois, but they're mine, and so it's only authentic for me to share them. I was waiting. I felt so burdened now that I had to be at home by all the stuff I had, all the accumulation of years. And I was waiting for the charity to open so I could just fill my car and drop it off. As we waited and waited for them to open again, I finally drove over, and I found a line all the way around the block of the charity in Ann Arbor I drop off at. It even stretched all the way around the block into the road, blocking traffic. And I said to myself, no way I'm going to wait in that line. So I went home, I went back here, and I did some more work, and then the next day I went back only to find the exact same line. So I waited in it, because I knew that along with everyone else, we were getting rid of all of this stuff that's been weighing us down, that we just didn't notice, because we weren't making our homes a home. I've noticed, as you probably have, that in this sabbatical year, when the land finally has claimed its Sabbath, as the Torah says it will if we don't give it to it, that without all the traffic and the filling the tank with gas over and over, the air smells cleaner, the waters look cleaner, the animals are walking through the streets. Whereas before, the wild turkeys walking around Ann Arbor would have been something to take pictures and send home. Now it's, hey, wild turkeys again. We've named the woodchucks that come to visit. The birds are singing each morning. The animals have returned. I remember early on in the pandemic, another lesson I learned. Remember when everyone was stockpiling toilet paper, and some of us who weren't so quick to the store were running out? You know, the United States is the world's largest consumer of toilet paper. More than 7 billion rolls of toilet paper are sold just in the United States each year. Americans use an average of 141 rolls each year, about 50% more than the average of other Western countries. Over 70% of the world's population doesn't use toilet paper, they use water. And when I used to live in Indonesia for those 2.25 years between college and my master's program, I learned to do the same. I thought it was, okay, so you're like, I can't believe he's talking about this. But I have a little rule, and it goes like this, which is, if the rabbi is going to talk about a bidet, it's got to be second day. So here it goes. Rather than the millions of trees that we harvest in North and South America each year to make this toilet paper, where the pulp is actually mixed with tons of water and bleach and chemicals, which consumes tons of water, contaminates the environment. So Lennon said, I've always wanted a bidet. I always thought that was ridiculous. And you're going to say, oh my gosh, what a privileged things to say. But in Indonesia, we didn't have bidets. We just had the water. And you can actually get a bidet hose for about $25. They are remarkable. When I told Lynn, they do an incredible job. They don't use very much water. And when I told Lynn that I was so excited that she got me to get one of these, and we all love it, and we don't use toilet paper, she said to me, I said, I got to look it up. Who invented this amazing bidet seat? And she said to me in the kitchen, don't tell me it's going to be a Jew. The toilet seat bidet was invented by Arnold Cohen. Growing up in New York, he watched his father, who had issues in that area, and he noticed that those issues were exacerbated by toilet paper, and he invented the bidet toilet seat. He was so excited about spreading his invention, he went all over the country, tried to buy huge page ads in leading periodicals and magazines, and no one would print them. They found it too disgusting. So he installed hundreds of free ones all around New York, figuring that this was going to catch on. People would see how great it is, like Rav Nadav and the Rav Nadav squad back in my home with the Rav Nadav pod. And no one bought it. He had his patent, and it went bust. Until in the 1970s, a Japanese company named Toto licensed his patent to bring them to Japan, where they are the standard and have since spread back to America. So once we had our toilet paper, we stocked up on food. So going back to the ways of the shepherd, actually the ways most people live. How are we going to live without restaurants? When I grew up, going to a restaurant was a treat. It meant we were going to go see Saba and Safta. It meant I got to eat exotic things like eggs fried with lox and onions. I'd get halva for dessert. Thank you, City Line Delicatessen. It didn't mean fast food, unless you were on a long road trip and stopped at the rest area, which meant stopping later at another rest area to solve the issue of the stomach ache. But Americans love dining out. Americans eat out 5.9 times per week on average, according to a 2019 Zagat study. And it's been increasing for decades. Now, I still love going to restaurants and supporting local chefs and entrepreneurs. I confess that on special occasions, we enjoy Zola Bistro, birthdays, or taking a colleague out for lunch on their birthday. But when did we need all these Applebee's and Chili's and Chuck E. Cheese's and Dave & Buster's and fast food? And how much money does it drain from our checking accounts? As we watch the pandemic reset take place, we watch the bankruptcies mount. And while I have no desire to see independently run restaurants fail, they're our local culture. They're our friends. I am not upset that the massive franchises of Pizza Huts are disappearing from the landscape. To me, it's like an invasive species dying off. Why did I think I needed to stop 3 times a week on the way home from shul to go get Chipotle with the vegetarian rice and beans and salsa when I could just make it at home? Why did I think I needed to go to Starbucks to get a $4 coffee when I can make one for myself? So then we loaded up on eggs and potatoes and rice and beans. but it wasn't good enough. This isn't good enough. We're not being productive. We have to be productive during the sabbatical year. We can't really rest. And so we started making our own bread. I can do this better than the ones I'm buying. And then we started making elaborate recipes from the New York Times. I'm talking about my home. And then we thought, why am I putting all my time into this? I just need some rest. So in the end, after months, we find ourselves at my house back on a simple rotation. Eggs and potatoes are great. Who knew the wonders of sriracha? Who knew that 8 and 9-year-olds would enjoy adding it to every meal, as we used to back in Indonesia, to make the morning rice and the evening rice taste good? Tuna fish and pickles, rice and beans, pasta and homemade pesto, and a simple salad every night. Repeat, repeat, repeat. We have our time back. We have our bank account back, and we are together. And as we read in the warnings of Deuteronomy about don't make the mistakes when you enter the new land, remember what you learned in the wilderness, God says. I taught you that you do not live on bread alone. I taught you that you can even live on manna. Now forget the absurd midrash, the manna is some kind of magical Willy Wonka invention, and just remember manna, the simple starch that grows on the certain wilderness plant in the morning and then disappears. Just like people across the globe live on simple starches that come from the ground, sweet potatoes and taro. This was one of the great lessons God was trying to teach us. Meals don't need to be elaborate except on special occasions. And Abraham was the richest man of his tribe, and it was good enough to invite everyone for some chickpeas, lentils, olives, and flatbread. You can live on the simplest of foods. The important thing is that you put your time and energy into each other. And another thing I noticed, okay, except for the Amazon boxes, and I'm still working on that, my recycling container wasn't overflowing with takeout containers anymore. And then I began to read more about plastics. The plastics industry invested in, so you know all those little triangle symbols that we look at on our plastics to make sure they go in the recycling bin, where they actually are not retired, they are landfilled. The plastics industry invested millions of dollars in the 1980s when some counties and parts of the country were thinking of banning plastics because of their toxic environmental impact. They spent these fortunes on lobbyists to pass laws requiring municipal recycling and the triangle symbols they invented. The only problem is that the triangle symbols only indicate that such products could theoretically be recycled, not that they can actually be recycled or be practically recycled. And so at least I was fooled. The plastics that we put, except for most of the number ones and the clean beverage containers, most of them and virtually all single-use ones, they're bundled up and shipped to China and developing countries, where the clean ones, the number ones mostly, the plastic beverage bottles would be taken out, and much of the rest would be buried or often burned, producing toxic gases inhaled by the local poor. They're filling our oceans and killing our wildlife. By 2050, plastic in the oceans will outweigh fish, predicts a report from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. As the pandemic passes, I've noticed that without all the takeout, without all the trips to Target, the blue container lacks the plastics. The potatoes, eggs, onions, rice, the beans, they don't come in single-use plastic containers. When everything we use is disposable, is waste, we are not in harmony with God's ways. And so we found ourselves asking whether we could just buy our food locally, from locals making it, rather than from corporations. And I looked around Ann Arbor, and the local farms and orchards are booming. They are fully subscribed during this sabbatical year, with people arriving in their cars, masking up, grabbing their reusable bin of fresh produce, and often going picking themselves outdoors, where it's much safer to be. I met a local artisan who makes furniture out of reclaimed wood. He told me he's had more business in the past 6 months than he's had in 3 years. We've returned to the simple life. And I know that there's tremendous food insecurity, but I wonder if the solution isn't the Torah's call to share the locally grown produce with the poor, rather than to outsource these to giant international conglomerates through subcontracts. And as we reach the end of the Torah, just before this Rosh Hashanah, God says in Deuteronomy chapter 29, "Va'olech etchem arba'im shana bamidbar, lo valu salmotechem me'alechem, v'na'acha lo valta me'al raglecha." I led you through this wilderness for 40 years, and the clothes on your back did not wear out, and nor did the sandals on your feet. Rashi gives the magical explanation that I don't like, thus teaching generations of our children misleading fantasies. He says that meant there was a miracle and the clothes grew as the children grew. And as this seems more like parental wish fulfillment to me, I prefer the message from the dissenting opinion of Ibn Ezra, who, counter to Rashi, argues with better logic. It is likely, he writes, that God gave the people in their 40 years extra endurance, or that he made them walk slowly. For when you have extra endurance, and that's the gift from God, and you allow God to give you the gift of moving more slowly, your clothes last longer. We've been walking more slowly, all of us. We've been channeling the gift of endurance. We've been facing each week with new challenges and changed directions. And when I look in the mirror, or on Zoom, which is the same thing, I see the same clothes over and over. And I'm amazed at how few clothes I really need. Entire closets of mine are collecting dusts. And we watch the J.C. Penney's, the Lord & Taylor's, the Barney's, the Zac Posen's, the malls go bankrupt. But designer Marc Jacobs already predicted it a year before the pandemic. When you have an industry built on expensive, disposable clothes driven by an insane cycle of popular media demanding new trends, and not seasonally, and not even monthly, but now weekly, it's going to lead to collapse. Globally, consumers purchase 80 billion pieces of new clothing each year. China and Bangladesh assemble the majority of these products. The United States consumes more clothing and textiles than any other nation in the world, and approximately 85% of the clothing Americans use, nearly 3.8 billion pounds annually, is sent to landfills as solid waste, amounting to nearly 80 pounds per American per year. 60% of synthetic fabrics are made of fossil fuels, and 85% of that material will end up in landfills where it will not decay or decompose. Polyester sheds microfibers that add plastic pollution to the ocean, and the chemicals used to process leather produce formaldehyde and byproducts that create cesspools out of entire villages in India. And it takes 10,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of cotton, which means 700 gallons of clean water are used to make 1 cotton t-shirt. The water consumed to grow India's cotton exports in 2013 would be enough to supply 85% of the country's that country's just in 2013 alone, the amount of water consumed for export cotton in India would have supplied its 1.24 billion people with 100 liters of water every day for a year. And meanwhile, in India, 100 million people do not have access to safe water. So we're in this insane cycle. I mean, Jeremiah and the prophets are looking at us and just saying, you've taken on the ways of the countries you're living in. Are you insane? The retailers only pay the design manufacturers for the clothes that sell. They return the rest, in case you don't know. Most of it ends up in landfills and dumpsters. And then we send these barges of clothing to developing countries where they disrupt the poor local economies, which for centuries relied on the local economies of clothing. And meanwhile, the people who are in the factories making the clothing work in slave or near slave conditions. So what we need to do is care for our clothes. We need to make them last longer. Even extending the life of our garments by an extra 9 months of active use would reduce the carbon, water, and waste footprint by around 20 to 30% each. You know that people previously had very few clothes, often a few sets. Work clothes, home clothes, and Shabbos clothes, and a change of season clothes. Why do you think that at Mount Sinai God commands us that if someone uses their clothing as collateral, you can never collect it for a bad loan because God says they need those. They probably sleep in them. I've also noticed as my clothes just don't seem to wear out, that my shoes, just like the Torah says, have not worn out. Even though I wear them outside and I take walks, but somehow they are not wearing out. I even love my shoes so much that I bought another pair that was new just to make sure that once these wear out, I can have them and they're still sitting in the box. I have slippers I bought before I met my wife, and I bought a new pair because I figured I'd be around the house more. My old pair is still magically keeping on. They're made of wool because I'm crazy about wool. Because we just said that we're the sheep and God is our shepherd. We are returning to being a people of the wool. We were the sheep and the goat people. I sleep on it. I sleep in it. It's warm, but it breathes. My mother would wear her same black wool outfit to every high holidays, sure that every lady in the sanctuary was thinking, poor Deborah, she's wearing the same outfit again. But I'm thinking the great shepherd in the sky would be looking down and judging her favorably, because I know I do. The pandemic has not only brought a giant Shabbat to us, forcing us to stop and slow down, and therefore to have the clarity to come to an awareness of what is essential. It has brought a Shabbat to the land, a Shabbat year, by placing us in the shoes of our ancestors. Let us live in our tents, not weighed down by possessions. Let us eat simply. Let us live with less and share more. Let's not waste so much. Let's not dispose so much. As Primo Levi said, Americans say they're a society of consumers, but I see a society of wasters. God has given us the gifts of, in the words of Ibn Ezra, endurance and slowing down. And we shall use those gifts of God. We will accept those gifts. Rosh Hashanah tells us to take stock of the journey that we have been taking so we can set the right goals and get on the right path toward the future. Teshuvah. How do I return to the original path? Tefillah. How do I reconnect with my people, my history, my future? Tzedakah. How can we live in the holy way of our ancestors? We have to go backward in order to move forward. Shana Tova. Adon Olam is on page 175. I'm going to make an announcement first, which is that as we're about preparing for Adon Olam, I want to let you know that remember, when the shofar service comes up later, nothing comes after it. So I just want to make one announcement now. I'm going to do my thank yous and thank yous on behalf of all of us at Yom Kippur. But remember, I know it's been a lot of this, but later tonight, I hope you'll join my family and me in our tent for Havdalah. So look on the website for the link or check your email, and I will see you then. As right now, get prepared for being the call of our ancestors with the shofar. Adon Olam, page 175.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yetzir nivra leit nasa b'chefso kol azai melech shemo nikra v'acharei kiklot hakol levado yimloch nora v'hu haya v'hu hoveh v'hu yiyeh v'tifara V'hu echad v'ein sheni lahamshilo lahachbira b'li reshit b'li tachlit v'lo oz v'hamisra V'hu eli v'chai go'ali b'tzur chavli b'yetzara V'hu nisi umanos li menakrosi b'yom ekra Biyado havkid ruchi, ve'tishan ve'ayira, v'im ruchi geviati, Adonai li ve'lo hira. Yerushalayim eshel zahav, v'shel nechoshet v'shel or, halachol eshirayich ani kinor. Yerushalayim eshel zahav,